Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. So today we're diving into integrated media technology. You reached out, wanted to get a better sense of what's going on with this company, and we've got some interesting stuff here. We've got a technical analysis that's going to kind of walk us through some of the recent stock movements, see what their trading volume's looking like. We've got an overview of the company itself, how they've been performing, and then we've got kind of a bigger picture profile. That's going to dig into their financials. Any potential red flags we should be aware of, maybe some of their strengths, how the market's feeling about them, and where they fit in with their competitors. So the goal today is to really synthesize all of this and give you a clear picture of IMTE right now and hopefully hit on what might be the most relevant and surprising stuff along the way.
I think, it's all about, at the end of the day, trying to find the story. What's the story that the numbers and the news and everything's painting for us about this company?
Right. And there's a pretty dramatic story to start with, actually. I mean, the technical analysis highlights a pretty massive drop in IMTE's stock price. It's down 42.56%, and that happened in just 24 hours, which, that brings it down to about 0.53999. So I mean that's a big move. I guess what could cause that kind of a sudden drop?
A drop like that is pretty significant, and it really signals a negative reaction from the market. Investors they're kind of spooked by something's happening. Maybe they feel like some existing worries are starting to boil over, and they're not sure what to make of it. And the interesting thing here is that, we don't have any specific news from the company that would explain this. So it's kind of a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, when you zoom out and look at it over a longer period, like over a year, it really highlights how volatile IMTE has been. I mean, their 52-week range goes from a high of $3.84 all the way down to a low of like 0.51 cents. So, I mean, that's a huge swing. It even went up recently. I mean, it jumped up 14.63%, got up to $1.41 at one point. So it can move up too. But what do you make of these really wild swings? I mean, is this kind of the nature of the beast with a company like this?
Yeah, I mean, volatility like this, you often see this with companies that are maybe smaller or operating in sectors that are a little bit more speculative. People are kind of betting on something big, and that can create a lot of ups and downs. The fact that we don't have specific bad news to explain that big drop makes me think that maybe the market sentiment is shifting a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe people are getting a little more risk averse, or maybe it's kind of a delayed reaction to some underlying issue that we're going to uncover as we dig deeper here. As for those upward swings, I mean, those can happen. Sometimes it's just short-term speculation. People are kind of jumping in and out, trying to make a quick buck. And maybe there is some good news, but it's not necessarily a reflection of the company's long-term health. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And speaking of things that are interesting, I noticed this when I was looking at the trading volume. So typically, the average trading volume for IMTE is pretty low. It's around 146,700 shares a day. But recently, there was a massive spike. We're talking 11.39 million shares. And that happened right around the same time as that big price drop. What do you read into that kind of volume change? What's that telling us?
Well, seeing that huge jump in trading volume right when the price is plummeting, that's a pretty clear sign that there was a big sell-off.
Yeah.
A lot of people wanted to get rid of their shares, and that could be because they suddenly lost confidence. Maybe there were some rumors going around or some worries that hadn't become public knowledge yet. But it definitely points to a really intense moment, a lot of activity, and likely a lot of downward pressure on that price.
Yeah, makes sense. And then the technical analysis also touches on moving averages, and it mentions that the current price is below both the 50-day moving average and the 200-day moving average, and that typically means that suggests a downward trend. But given IMTE's history of these huge price swings, how reliable are these indicators, do you think, for a stock like this that's so jumpy?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's something you really have to consider, because when you got a stock that's already so volatile, bouncing all over the place, just relying on those traditional technical indicators like moving averages, it can be a little bit misleading because the price is moving so erratically. It can cross those averages pretty frequently without really meaning that there's a a sustained change in direction. I mean, it just kind of, it's jumping up, it's jumping down, and those quick reversals can give you some false signals. So is it better to look at those indicators along with other things like that big volume spike that we were just talking about? You got to kind of put it all together to get a better sense of the overall picture.
So let's try to get a better sense of the company itself now. And it sounds like IMTE, they do a lot. They're involved in technology investment. They do product development. They've got distribution, and their products, they range. They go all over the place. They've got 3D display equipment, audio products, electronic glass, air filters, even new energy products. Then on top of that, they're also manufacturing and selling like laminated switchable glass, nano-coated plates for filters or purifiers. They're in the IoT space. And then there's their NFT marketplace. It's called Ouction. And they're even involved in halal certification and distribution. So I mean that's a lot. That's a lot of different things going on. Do you see this as a strength? Like, you know, they've got all these different avenues for growth, or is it maybe a sign that they're spread a little too thin?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a lot to take in. And that level of diversification, I think you're right, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, having all those different business lines could be a good thing. It could give them, multiple sources of revenue. It could mean they're not as reliant on any one particular market. But it begs the question, do they have the expertise to really manage all of this, to be successful in all these different areas? If there isn't a clear connection, a synergy between these businesses, I think there is a risk that they could be diluting their focus, spreading themselves too thin. And ultimately, that could hurt their chances of really making it big in any one of these markets. They might not have the resources to really go all in on any one thing.
It's true, and it's also worth pointing out that we haven't seen any specific news from the company that would explain that big price drop. So it makes you wonder if it's maybe something bigger. Is it broader market sentiment? Has investor confidence just taken a hit in general, or could it be something about IMTE's financials that people are worried about? But they're not, it hasn't come out officially yet.
Yeah. I mean, when you don't have a specific news catalyst to point to, it does suggest that the market's reaction is maybe stemming from a bigger concern.
Yeah.
Maybe people are getting worried about the company's overall financial health, or maybe it's tied to, something happening in the wider economy that's impacting similar types of investments. But it definitely highlights the fact that stock prices, they don't always move just because of some big announcement. Sometimes it's more about the underlying feelings, and those can be harder to pinpoint.
Okay, so let's look at those financials then. So in 2023, IMTE brought in $383,813 in revenue. So that's a little bit higher than the year before, but their net loss, that was significant. It was $16.73 million, and that's a lot bigger than the loss they had the previous year. And their earnings per share, that's sitting at -$6.40. I mean, this paints a picture of a company that's generating some revenue. They are making sales, but they're really struggling to turn a profit. So how worried should we be about these losses, especially compared to how much revenue they're bringing in?
Well, I think those numbers they're definitely cause for concern. I mean, when you've got revenue of under $400,000, and then you're looking at a net loss that's over $16 million. I mean, that suggests there are some pretty serious operational challenges going on, or maybe the business model itself just isn't sustainable as it stands. It really makes you question their ability to actually become profitable, and whether their operations are going to be viable long term. And then you look at that big loss per share. That just adds to the sense that the company's under a lot of financial pressure, and that their investors are feeling that pressure too.
So we've got those big losses, we've got that declining stock price, and then there's also the fact that IMTE received a deficiency letter from Nasdaq. So those are some pretty significant red flags. But then again, they are venturing into these newer areas. They've got IoT, they've got the NFT trading with their Ouction marketplace, and they're involved in halal certification and distribution. And those could be potential growth areas if they can execute well, of course. But when you weigh all these different factors, I mean, which ones should we be focusing on?
I think you're right. Those are all really important things to consider. And I think those potential growth areas, those are definitely interesting. It's worth keeping an eye on those and seeing how they develop. But I have to say, those red flags that you mentioned, especially the ones related to their financial health and their standing with Nasdaq, those are probably the most important things to focus on right now. in the short term at least, a deficiency letter from Nasdaq, that's serious business. It can have some pretty big implications for a publicly traded company. I mean, if they don't address it, they could even get delisted. So I think IMTE really needs to focus on overcoming those immediate challenges first, and then if they can do that, then maybe they can start to really capitalize on those potential growth opportunities that you mentioned. But first things first, you gotta deal with those immediate issues.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And it seems like even though there's, some interest in their NFT and halal efforts, the overall market sentiment towards IMTE is pretty cautious. And understandably so, given their financial performance and those regulatory issues. And they're also operating in sectors that have some pretty big, pretty well-established competitors. So where do you think IMTE could actually find a real sustainable competitive advantage?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, when you look at some of their more traditional sectors, there are some really big players already out there. So it's going to be tough for them to really break through in those areas. But I think, their best bet is probably in those newer, more niche areas that we talked about, like their Ouction NFT marketplace or their halal certification and distribution efforts. If they can really establish themselves in those markets, carve out a strong position where there's not as much competition, and they can show that they're actually gaining traction. I mean, that could be a big differentiator for them. But again, they've got to be able to do all of that while they're simultaneously tackling those core financial and regulatory issues. It's a lot to juggle.
It is. It's a lot to juggle. So just to kind of summarize everything we've gone over, you've got a company here that's got a highly volatile stock. You've got some significant price drops recently, and their financial losses are pretty concerning, but they are involved in some potentially interesting markets. But then again, the fact that recent price drop doesn't seem tied to any specific news, that suggests that maybe there are some broader worries at play here. What do you think?
No, I think you've summed it up perfectly. I mean, it's a complex picture. It's not a simple, straightforward story. You've got these contrasting elements. You've got, on the one hand, you've got the potential for future growth, and then on the other hand, you've got these financial struggles, these red flags. And I think the real question, the big uncertainty, is whether IMTE can effectively use those diverse interests that they have to overcome those challenges. Can they get their financials in order? Can they satisfy Nasdaq? I mean, that's the big unknown, and that's what makes this whole situation so interesting and so potentially risky.
It is. It's definitely interesting. So this has been, a snapshot based on what we have right now. There's, always more digging we could do. We could go deeper into those individual business segments. We could look at the specifics of that Nasdaq compliance issue. But we hope this gives you a good starting point, a more informed perspective on IMTE. And if you found this helpful, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Let us know what other companies, what other topics you'd like us to unpack.
Yeah, we're always looking for new deep dives.
Absolutely.
Yep.
We'll see you next time. Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast.